It starts as it always does. A parent waking you up, opening up the curtains, letting you know that your friends will be by any minute. Nostalgia dripping in the scene until you get a slap to the face and you get told to wake the heck up. Then you're greeted to an airship armada, flying into an unknown destination, being told you're going on a mission on which you may not return, with the music pumping with intensity, urgency, and just the right mix of uncertainty. And that's just the first 3 minutes of the game. Welcome to the Zetaverse. I'm Hoda Zeta, that is my real face, and today we'll be talking about something I've wanted to talk about for a long time, Chained Echoes. I'm a fan of them old school RPGs, and I found this game listed on a few lists of the best RPGs of recent times. So I confidently bought it and let it sit in my Steam library for 6 or so months, like any good gamer with a Steam backlog does. I ended up opening it kinda on a whim. It was a Saturday, some plans got cancelled, and I was ready to settle down into something new. And boy, this game nails its first impression. I think that's why over 90% of people that pick it up on Steam have completed the prologue, whereas in the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, also on Steam, only 78.5% have completed Eden Prime, which is the first mission. First impressions aren't everything, but this game continues to deliver on an excellent main cast of what I'd argue is about 6 characters, 3 supporting ones, and 4 good solid party fillers. I say party fillers, they're more like endgame visitors, but more on that later. The game stars Glenn, a young mercenary that holds a lot of guilt for a huge disaster at the beginning of the game. Killian, Glenn's more experienced best friend. Len, the long-lost princess of Tar. Rob, the ever-loyal yet jerky retainer to Len. Victor, a famous author who feels very much like the Obi-Wan Kenobi, except if he was happy and jovial. And Cien, a notorious thief also known as the Red Succubus. There are some other crucial characters. The Thraz and Amalia come to mind, but those are the main 6 that the story follows 95% of the time. Now you may have noticed I said it stars many people, and I don't make that comparison lightly. Final Fantasy VII, the main character is Cloud Strife. Trails of Cold Steel, you have Rean Schwarzer. Chrono Trigger has Chrono. And Fire Emblem, you have your main lord like Ike, or your player avatar, like the Pepsi Man. Each of those games individually boast a cast of tens, maybe even dozens of characters. But this game does something I haven't really seen done well since Final Fantasy VI. And I would argue that it does it better than Final Fantasy VI. Now, Final Fantasy VI is probably one of my favorite RPGs of all time. It really changed the way that I saw how stories end up working with the gameplay. And it's just a masterpiece. One of the ways it does that is that it switches between its main character in different acts. What I mean by that is, in the first act, it focuses primarily on Terra, the soldier of the Empire with no memory who can use real magic. Then it kind of goes into an ensemble, with Locke having some leading roles, Terra, and then Edgar having a pretty big role there. Then once the world goes to the world of Ruin, it shifts to Celes, and I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. From there, as you regather your party, every character has a moment, and you all come together. But in the final moment of the game, where you finally deal with the villain of the game, Kefka, most of the dialogue comes from the party's perspective, where there's no single line there. They say, no, we're not going to stand for this. Then they all get one little line, and then they go into battle. Chained Echoes does it differently. Glenn is definitely the main character, but there are large sections of the game where you see it from Len's perspective, and Victor's perspective, and Cien's perspective. Everyone gets their moment to shine, but each character can react to those events, and it stays focused on Glenn as a focal point for the majority of the story. Part of this is the time and when it's released. Final Fantasy VI came out in 1994, games were much smaller, and Chained Echoes came out in 2022. Part of this is also how Chained Echoes is a huge reiteration on core concept from many good RPGs. There are many points in this game that as you play it, you'll be reminded of times where you were playing older RPGs such as Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, so on and so forth. There's some vibe that gets translated. But I'd say the majority comes down to the game's developer having a singular focus and vision for these characters, and understanding them intimately. That's probably due to the development team being just one guy, Matthias Linde. His talent really shows in the story, and its writing. Like any good RPG made in that Japanese style, the start of the game really keeps its focus small on just a few characters. And before you know it, there's upwards of several antagonistic groups after your party for various reasons, an evil empire causing all sorts of havoc, and the very fate of the world hanging in the balance near the end. At the same time, the world itself is just fun. There's so many items you can pick up in the world that have tongue-in-cheek descriptions, so many unique and inventive enemies that I've never seen before, and the way that the twists are delivered always floored me and made me go, oh man. There's also so much optional world building you hear about too, like an entire continent being covered in an evil fungus that if left unchecked would be spreading to other continents. Which it is. One of the nations attacking Volandis is doing so to gain a little breathing room, as their citizens are being forced to evacuate north to avoid the fungus in the south. I won't say that the story is perfect. There's a few moments that seem oddly paced. I especially remember one of the bigger twists not hitting as well, and some of the characters' final quests seem a little bit tacked on and not as important, but they were on theme, and they are nice if you enjoy those particular characters. This also had a little bit of, we can't tell you right now, but hold on till later writing in the story. I will say that was frustrating at first, but surprisingly, it was one of the few times that it actually worked for me. Now let's talk about the combat. Combat is basic, simple, turn-based combat, and that's not really everyone's cup of tea. But Chained Echoes mixes it up by allowing you to pick and prep for your fights because you can see each enemy in the overworld. The combat also has something called the Overdrive Meter. The Overdrive Meter mixes up the moment-to-moment gameplay by giving you a bar to manage. Each attack will move that position more and more on the right, but if you go too far right, then you're going to be in the red zone and you'll take extra damage and you'll deal less damage. But if you don't move it at all, then you're just dealing normal damage and taking normal damage. And that might not be enough on some of the harder fights. You also have the ability to swap to a single backup character. This allows you to feel like you're fielding a bigger party, which is a bigger pain point with large cast RPG games, but it also makes it a bit more interesting to strategize. Do you put your two healers together to swap out different types of healing each round? Do you put them in the back, only bringing one out when absolutely necessary? Do you put Victor behind Len, who hits really, really hard, or behind Rob, who debuffs and poisons really hard? These seem like minor decisions, but as you're progressing and fighting different enemies, different compositions can really make the difference between victory and defeat. There's also armor and weapon and gem customization, which is a bit clunky if I'm honest, and it looks like it was also reworked post-game a bit too, but it's still kinda tedious. It's good for customization, good for optimization, but it's the only thing that makes you feel like you need to grind to get what you want. And let me tell you, that might be one of my favorite things about Chained Echoes, is that there really isn't any grinding. All levels are based on getting Grimoire shards, which essentially lets you pick a trait on a character's level up sheet. You get these shards after progressing past a certain point in the story, or by completing side challenges on the reward board. It's a lot like Milestone EXP in D&D. It's not really the enemies you fight, but it's the tentpole experiences that really power you up, and it fits really well here to aid your sense of progression. After overcoming a particularly difficult trial, you'll get another point or two to spend. This you can use to buff your characters, and you can do so in the way that you want. Do you want to get that new ability that has that elemental affinity that will crush your current foes? Maybe you have all the abilities that you want, but you're hoping to buff up someone's stats, say like in agility. Or maybe you want a passive bonus where you deal just 15% more damage to plant-based enemies. Sure, you may have 12 or 20 skills when you're done, but you can only equip so many active skills at a time, and so many passive skills at a time. And that will just continue to give you more options to customize your build in between battles and in between zones. It doesn't start you with that many, just a few core abilities to get started, and one or two passes that you'll eventually opt into. There's not full character customization, like you can't turn Sienna into a buff tanky character, but she does have an evasion build with her stats and abilities, so you can double down with those and gems onto armors and weapons to really take advantage of those builds, and then nothing will hit her. I also just want to take a minute and praise the art direction. The music is really, really good. It's just like chef's kiss. Mwah. The bee's knees. Eddie Moranruco. Eddie M., who is the composer, creates something that's something nostalgic with those old beat tunes, yet something new. It makes it feel modern, and it makes the game feel fresh and new while keeping the vibe of those retro feel RPGs. That's probably the best I could describe it. I'm not a poet, I'm not a musician, but it is something that just feels amazing, especially when you listen to it. I've actually added a few of these soundtracks to my personal playlist. Roland Fields and its bustling adventure just reminds me of a Xenoblade game. The flower fields of Perpetua remind me kind of a Metroid game. A mix of wonder and weird that just gets me thinking of the wonder of the devastation of the land that we see. And the burning intensity of Into the Storm always gets my blood pumping whenever it's played. And the pixel art is just top notch. I'm not going to say I'm an expert on sprite work or anything, but from the monster designs to the cinematic angles that Matthias gets from the style, really pushes the boundaries of what I thought was possible in this medium. I think it's pretty clear by now, I'm a huge fan of this game. It's actually the second game on Steam I ended up 100%ing and got all the achievements. The first one was To the Moon, and that doesn't really count. Chained Echoes is relatively short by modern standards. It takes about 30 or 40 hours to beat, and about 50 hours for a completionist playthrough, which is so welcome in the modern day of gaming and the distractions out there. But if pixel art and turn-based combat ain't your thing, then this probably won't change your mind about it. Chained Echoes knows very much what it wants to be, and for those that are looking for modern twists on solid turn-based gameplay with characters that feel like characters, then I don't think that you want to miss this. So yeah, go buy it. Like right now. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead and buy it. And play it. It's alright. I'll wait. Actually, I won't. But you should pause the video here and come back in 40 hours or so. Oh hey, welcome back. I'm glad that you played it, because now I want to talk spoilers with you. That's right, the real reason I'm making this is to talk to somebody about this game, because not enough people are talking about Chained Echoes, and I've got things I want to discuss. But I don't want to spoil anything, because now there will be spoilers if you haven't played it. And now I won't spoil anything, because you went in and played it. Right? Right? First, right? I know I was hooked on this game after the first hour. After the explosion, after such an opening, I knew I wanted to see where everything went. I like how it took its time in the opening, introducing its main characters, giving Len and Rob a lot of time to go on a quest to hunt for assassins in the cave, where the game decidedly shows you it's not shying away from death and the dark stuff. Which then it lightens up with Victor just having a good time in a scenario that's very reminiscent of the Chrono Trigger Carnival, and some very, very rockin' turtles. I love that Victor gets conned and that we don't get to see all the best FF6 gear. And then it transitions into Cien perfectly, and we get to see some of the optional content where she doesn't steal medicine and money from a sick kid to let you know that despite her tough side, she's not a monster. I'll just say again, otherwise this video will be years long, I think this game's opening is strong. And I think the battle system keeps itself fresh and keeps mixing things up for the majority of the run. I especially enjoy how certain abilities you unlock aren't necessarily more powerful versions of themselves, but are ways that you can save on active ability slots. Let me explain. Len's Heaven's Tear ability uses the element that the enemy is weak to automatically. That way, instead of carrying your fire thrust and your wind thrust and your water thrust, you can just carry Heaven's Tear, and that will do the elemental damage for you. It's a nice convenience feature later in the game that also allows you to experiment with some of the other abilities that she gets. This is very similar to Glenn's All Break. So instead of carrying the Power Break and the Defense Break, you get All Break, and that lets him to have a couple of his offensive abilities like his Fire Strike. I liked how big the world was, but also that it wasn't too big. Each area being 9 screens made it easy to come back later and make sure you've explored the whole thing, and the Sky Armor's flight abilities made that much easier too. That's probably the only thing I really appreciate about the Sky Armor, the exploration options it unlocks. When I got it, I thought it would break game traversal, but it really doesn't. The game is really good at forcing you down specific paths, while still making Sky Armor faster than running around, which is still pretty fast in this game. To be fair, I also think this game without Sky Armor would be very weird, especially with the build-up and how Glenn is such a good pilot, even though he gets shot down twice. It's also kind of neat how it interacts with the overdrive system, where you can switch gears to change the direction of the overdrive bar and which actions move it which way. With that said, I think the only problem with Sky Armor is that it's kind of boring. It's like having the limited party members that can do big damage, can take big hits, but at the end of the day, the customization is kind of an illusion. To optimize your Sky Armors, you'll want to be switching up weapons every time one is mastered, which happens fairly often, which means that the way that the Sky Armor combat stays fresh is you remembering which Sky Armor now has which weapon and which support weapon. This also comes around at a time when the normal party combat's kinda reached its peak. There's still a couple of good encounters that still happen with the party members directly, but it's kind of already shown everything it has to offer. Then the Sky Armor comes, distracts you from the lack of any meaningful development in their normal combat system by giving you a different way to fight enemies. I do like the customization, especially when it comes to the colors. I love how the frames have different sprite work. I like how some of the frames have unique weapon sprites. It's just usually the same thing, and less exciting and dynamic as the normal combat system. There's not a choice of, do I buff up here to move the gauge, or do I push it here and try to end the boss before the end of combat? It's more of just stop attacking, recharge, attack weaker until the gauge is in a good spot again. It's not exactly comparable to, say, swapping to Cien, who may have 1 HP left and will fall over if so much as anything breathes on her, but has a 95% chance to crit and end the fight. Or deciding to keep Victor and healing the whole party, rather than swapping to another party member who has an ability that'll move the overdrive gauge in the way that I want it to go. I think the Sky Armor system has potential, and I really enjoy it for the late game exploration, even if I can never remember which button to push to enable it. How hard is it to press the left bumper? And let's talk about the party for a second, because not all party members are created equal. Let's go from, say, the worst party member, in my opinion, to the best party member, objectively so. And we'll start with the last main character story that you get. Eigel! Oh, it's like Eagle. I get it now. Eigel is someone I really wanted to like. I tend to like big, beefy, damage-soaking characters who also go slower and deal really big damage. And I think his speaking was goodingly good. He just suffers from being a tank in this game, which just isn't that good. It's not bad. It's not a bad option to have a tank. It's just not as good. As it happens, his damage reduction just isn't that effective. His speed really suffers, and the game has pushed you into killing things quickly. And it turns out that dead things can't deal damage, which means that you usually survive more. His story arc doesn't help either. It's way more tragic than it has any right to be. We're talking about ritualistic unaliving. But we spent little time with the village that I just struggled feeling the weight of that story choice. It's not like as soon as we meet them it happened. It had some spacing and setup. It just felt a bit much. Something like that was needed to set up the church's villainy, but I wish there was more of that we got to see earlier so we get to feel it more in-game. Because of where he's at, I put him as one of the supporting characters in the game. Next, we have Raphael. Now, despite the fact that it kind of feels like he's there to finish out the 12th slot in the party, we've actually seen Raphael for the majority of the game, and it's kind of cool to get him, and that's why I enjoyed having him in the party the entire time I've had him. Because of when he's added to the game, most of his character development is in the main story, but it's a little bit of a side story, it's a little bit of a sidetrack, so you get most of it in the actual recruitment itself. And I think that's more than games like this usually give for characters like this. The problem is, he's a tank class character, and he's just too slow. There were about 2 fights in total that I used him where he admittedly came in clutch, but you don't really need him. There's not much more I have to say about him. Other than, it's always cool to see an awesome bad guy join your party. Next we have Magnolia. I really like her design, and she always came across as so mysterious, so cool, so quirky, and I appreciated how she was able to dive in and help us out earlier in the game before she's recruited. However, I think her recruitment strips its impact. It's too quick, she's explained too quickly. There is some merit to the decision of whether you save the fairies, or whether you save the hunters, or whether you kill both groups, but it doesn't go anywhere because the story's already over. The nail in the coffin for me is that she's a luck-based character in combat, and that's never been my cup of tea. I bet fans of Setzer and Final Fantasy VI would enjoy her. But let's not waste time on Magnolia. Let's go to Tomke. He's the first recruitable non-required party member, and I like the concept of turning enemies into cans of soda to regain his memories. Just eats them right up. It's great. It's so awesome. It's neat also how that story comes together. But I'm not a fan of blue mages and that archetype. Gathering the right kind of enemies for skills that might be good or bad just isn't my thing. And it doesn't help that most of the really good abilities come late game, where he could have been useful way beforehand. But like I said, it's a great animation. The last of the bonus characters is Mika, and she's really a step above the rest. She's recruitable after hanging out with Tomke and getting him a certain amount of abilities, and her recruitment is in depth. It also encapsulates Tomke's arc as well, which made me feel for both of them, honestly. It ended in a way I did not expect, and was even wholesome, though escaping the worm felt a bit rushed, so running a theme, we'll get back to that. But overall, it was pretty good. The reason that I rate her so high is her combat. The way her combos work together for that big single target or that big AoE is just a lot of fun. And I can't get over how the combo can wait a turn if you need to heal someone or wait for the overdrive gauge to fall. That's a big quality of life improvement. Combined with the big damage of a tier 3 strike, it made Mika one of my go-to party members. Next up is one of the main characters, Rob. Rob feels weak when you get him, and the game supports this with his ability to give debuffs like Poison and Toxic, and setting traps. He plays a bit differently, not as much direct damage, but uses thoughtful attacking, which fits his character. And boy, does he have a rude attitude with most of the party. I think he gets a lot of leeway because we see him react in many different ways for a long period of time. When you first see him, you think noble brat, but you see his upbringing and his being delegated to servitude and constant abuse. You can understand, though not condone, his rude actions up to that point. Then again, I think that's what I like most about Rob, is that he does learn to be better. And in the right times, and at the right moments, Rob hits hard, both story-wise and in gameplay. Where I think he suffers the most is his kit is good on debuffs, but the enemies are generally too weak on normal, that you don't really need to take the time to set up to take the enemy down. If you can take them down in 2 turns, or if someone else can kill them in 1 turn, you probably just want to take them out in 1 turn. When the fights are longer, like in boss fights, I find him very useful. And I'm sure in harder difficulties he'd be much more useful for the consistent damage over time for the longer fights. His final quest is very unique. You end up meeting his father, and seeing Rob go full circle and free himself of the prejudices in his life and grow as a person is just really gratifying to see. I think that his father could have been set up just a little more to really lean into and set up the moment, but it is done well enough that I felt like I was right there with him when he was speaking to his dad. Next, we have to talk about Amalia, who's another supporting character. But how does Zeta? She's in the opening bits, and she's set up real early as a counterpart to Frederick. That is true, dear viewer, and she has her moment to shine with a cooking side quest. That's not to say that I don't like her. I actually feel for her a lot. This game with levity and rock songs for turtle races does not shy away from dark things. And boy, Amalia's past was something way more dark than I thought it'd be. Nobleman killing nobleman, brother killing brother, sister killing sister, a mother dead before a child's eyes, making a deal with a devil that doesn't give you what you're looking for, but allows you to survive when the rest of the family is poisoned in front of you. It just gives me the creeps thinking about it. Then she has to confront her past. Having made that deal and having no future is just so sad. And I'm glad the game doesn't shy away from it. Amalia is also a great healer and a decent mage. And her dog, Cress, and its ability of Cress Command is highly useful for passive healing or damage. The only downside I have for her is that she has guns, my favorite fantasy weapon. No joke, Balthier is the best. It's the worst physical attack in the game. The only other flaw is the fact that she's socially awkward, that when she tries to be nice, she just comes out as very, very rude. It's a fun enough trope, it just seems a bit misplaced, especially with that backstory that she has. Next we have Bathraz, who's the GOAT, and he's a great supporting character. He shows up to help Cien so she's not fighting alone, and when he does it through a cool system of weapon summoning. His elemental attacks all summon weapons that strike enemies, but they build up passively until he can do an attack that strikes enemies with all of the weapons that he's summoned so far during the fight. Solid first impression. Had a bit of that Shadow motif from Final Fantasy VI, because when you first meet him, he's only really interested in the money, and he leaves when it's convenient. However, unlike Shadow, he turns up later with Victor and is shown to have a more noble ambition to help stop the end of the world. I put him here because his combat potential is really good, though it suffers from short fights, which doesn't let him unleash his full potential very often. His backstory is also tragic. His village destroyed, his son dying, him selling his soul to the same devil and getting his limbs replaced, but the limbs carry the soul of his dead son, which allows him access to his dark powers. It's useful to set up curses before Amalia is set up and help give her a more hopeful ending, as they bond through their shared experience, and him vowing to help break the curse so she can actually have a future, unlike his son. It's actually very heartwarming, and one of the reasons that I put these two together. Next up is Victor, who's another big one of the main cast. His carefree, jovial attitude is greatly contrasted with his mysterious nature and knowledge of the reincarnations of Glenn and Lyn. It's done so fantastically. First, his attacks are musical instruments, which is just a fun thing to do, and it really shows off his personality. Second, he's a solid healer for the majority of the game, and he does it in a roundabout way with a regeneration buff rather than with direct heals, which is pretty unique. Honestly, him guiding the party from a distance was all pretty stock standard kind of stuff, but then the Glenn reveal blew my hat off and recontextualizes so much of his interactions with the party. I love that his "I can't tell you" is more than just a trope. Let's be honest, it was probably written as a trope first and then explained this way, but the explanation is so good. But it's an actual consequence of a failed cycle with his long life and trying to be a good student to his master. Him not only being Glenn's secret father, but kind of like his secret son mentoring him and returning the favor, really crystallizes his motivations throughout the whole game. His earlier actions feel supported by that, and it's the culmination of his character, especially as this time he can help Glenn and Lyn. I'll honestly say he just seemed pretty basic, "I believe in you," until then, and rewatching scenes, everything just hits so different. That's the kind of twist that sticks with you, and that's why Victor's here at number 4. 3 is Cien. She's the Han Solo, she's the thief, yet she has this katana, which indicates that she's had a high level of training. But it's never really hinted on, or built up, or explained until much, much later in the game. What's great about her in combat is that she has a couple of techniques that soften an enemy up, and then goes in for a big Petal Storm attack that does a ton of damage. And since she's a character with a high crit rate, that means those big numbers can get even bigger numbers very consistently. She's fast, she's tough, and her scenes are good levity for heavier moments, and really display her resourcefulness and selfishness, In fact, the game makes it very clear that she's primarily joining the party at first to avoid old debt collectors and other gangs that she's ripped off. With that said, what's really cool about all of this is that it's all an act. After the game takes emphasis on her being selfish and being with the party for her own reasons, and it starts to put her in the background. Like, she's there, she has a couple lines, but then there's a moment where everyone gets a glimpse of their past at a very key moment. And you get to see a moment in her past, and it comes almost out of nowhere. It turns out she used to work for the church. She used to be a compatriot of Raphael. She even allows herself to come clean to the party, sharing her past with a group of individuals that she's finally grown close to. And they all say, yeah, we know, we figured it out as soon as people recognized you, which I thought was a nice twist on that whole dynamic. But she just keeps on surprising, and as the enemies get harder in the late game, she hits harder, she learns to be a reliable dodge tank, all the while still being able to dish out the big numbers and damage. I might like Victor's twist better, but I was more surprised by Cian. And when I didn't have Cian in my party, everything just felt tougher and harder to deal with. Second is Len. Len is the last maiden, and now the last incarnation of the maiden. Her importance is key to the plot at several points, her being the lost princess of Tarn, her relationship to Frederick, the evil emperor, then her being linked up to being a maiden to defeat the Harbinger, then the maiden to defeat the Harbinger, all the while being tough and being a natural leader, being decisive in moments where the group needs that leadership. For a long period of the game, I thought she was the main character, and I thought that she slid into the role very well. She's kind, considerate, has personal stakes in the wider war, and when she dies, some good veins save her. I don't really know what all of that means and how that works exactly, but it does double down on her being the last chance to defeat the Harbinger. However, after her death, other than the touching reunion with Frederick at Frederick's death, and putting Glenn back together again, she kind of plays a second fiddle. Everyone is interested in kidnapping her and using her to her own ends, but once the church is destroyed, everyone kind of cools their jets, and her story is toned down a little bit. To be fair, this still leaves her as the most important person in all of Atlantis, and if Matthias makes a sequel to Chained Echoes, then I think that she'll be a major part of it. As for combat, she hits really hard, especially with the right elemental attacks. Usually the first female lead in an RPG like this is the mage character or the healer, and I'm glad Chained Echoes didn't fall into that trope. And number 1 is Glenn. Glenn is very interesting. Probably one of the most unique characters I've ever had the courtesy of playing as. The way he's set up, he has a lot of guilt for activating the Grand Grimoire at the beginning of the game, which I don't think he should feel directly responsible for. But I understand where that comes from. Being aimless after and leaning on Killian to support him makes a lot of sense. He kind of feels like Killian's sidekick, but things turn around and he grows up after he fails again with the second explosion. There's the 3-month time skip, the kids that only he can see, but also Victor can see them. So then you're like, what's so special about Victor? But then it's actually Glenn. Oh, it was such a good twist. He decides to act for himself and atone, which actually mirrors his past lives. Because it turns out Glenn was a horrible person in his past life, and he killed Len in her former life, as well as indirectly killing Len's former love, all due to selfishness and greed. When he learns this, it shatters his mind. Turns out he was always a horrible person. His guilt was justified. The children who were remnants and reminders of his sins were right. And he fractures in kind of like a Cloud from Final Fantasy VII moment. But as you explore his past and his past lives and help him come to terms with it, you realize that his past self realized his mistakes and pushed himself to make things right, as best as he could. Chasing someone across time, not for glory this time, but to make things right for her, to apologize. In the course of these lives, he saves Victor from poverty. He becomes one of the greatest minds of Nysa, even though he doesn't have any magical talent himself. And he saves many of the lower classes. He befriends Victor, dies, lives as a firefighter, helps out there. One of his lives gets saved by Victor, where Victor raises him as a son and gets to partake in his life as he gets married and has kids, invents a printing press, says goodbye to his kids as he gets sent out to do it all again. And it's hinted that there are many more things that he does. As it turns out that all of Victor's plays and his literary works are actually based on Glenn's many, many past lives. The fact that Glenn struggles with himself is indicative of the plight within all of us, really. We've all made mistakes in our past, and in a way we can never take those back. But that doesn't mean that we still can't do good and become better people than we have been. But those acts will still chain us to the past unless we strive to atone to the people we've hurt. That's why Glenn can't move on. That's why Len's forgiveness is so important. And Len makes a point that it's not his great deeds or his many good acts that earned her forgiveness. It's that he has changed. And he did change. Once that change occurred, the true chained echo of his heart disappeared, and he could move on. That was one bit about the ending I didn't understand until I really thought about it. Glenn dying and moving on seemed a bit out of the blue, but looking back on it, it does kind of symbolize the way that we can move on. Only once those chains, those bad deeds, and the mistakes of our past are taken care of. And while Killian didn't really deserve the chance to be kept alive, it was one last good deed Glenn could do for his old friend, from a kind and penitent man. Yeah, I didn't really talk about Killian, even though he's in your party for a large portion of the game. His combat was okay. His healing was essential for the early game, but at the end of the day, I think he might be one of the weaker written characters. As far as the villains go, the Vayne are so otherworldly and dangerous and alien. They're fascinating and unique, and the blood-red font that appears only when they speak is such a contrast to everything else that we've seen. They also speak from a sense of logic about why they destroy the world, to keep the flow of life into the Maelstrom, to keep the Harbinger imprisoned. King Frederick continues to be crueler and crueler every day, but ultimately it's because he wanted to unite the land, and he believed he could only do so by uniting his foes against him. It's a little tropey, but it's a trope that I really enjoy, and honestly, I didn't see it coming. Gawain is enigmatic, powerful, but defeating you isn't his real goal. It's to guide you, and to give you the weapons he thinks you need to destroy the Vayne. And not knowing that, then realizing he's the voice that's guiding you always to be doing the right thing, is an interesting twist on the relationship between Glenn and Gawain. Mathai was the general who served Tarn and would retrieve Len at any cost, and sold his soul for power and a super cool boss fight. Not much to him, but I do love an arrogant and prideful villain. Killian just isn't quite there, at least for me. There's a lot of time in which there's a lot of setup. He does say that he wants to reform the world and make a big change, but I don't think it really sticks. It sounds more like he wants to rebuild the Iron Bull. Then it's revealed that he wants to use the Grimoire to use its power to reshape things, and it feels a little bit out of left field. Further interactions with him remind me of Delita from Final Fantasy Tactics, where he joins the church to gain more influence and power. While I'm pretty sure Delita didn't do anything debasing, this game makes it clear that Killian did, almost desperate in his search for power, which again didn't seem to jive too much with his earlier personality. The final fight is a bit more symbolic. Killian is a man who is much like Glenn when he killed Len. He's singularly focused on what he wants, and it ends up destroying him. However, Len had a chance at another life, And now, after Killian and the Vayne merged and they were defeated, Killian gets a second chance too. It still doesn't quite land, it seems a bit off, but I see the intent there. Despite that though, the way it ends, with the new child June meeting up with Killian, I am excited to see where his story leads next. I'm not saying his story is good in this game because we haven't seen all of his story yet. I've never found that to be a strong defense for any story. I'm saying that I think Killian could have been better, and I think in the next game we see him in, if there's a sequel, he will be better, and that's something that I want to see. There are a couple of other topics I wanted to bring up that don't really fit into the other section. For example, I really like that the token merchant in the dungeons is actually the same guy. In other games, they're usually different folks in different dungeons for different reasons, so having it be the same guy and having him have his own little arc is really funny, especially because he denies it, like, no, I'm a different merchant, but then finally admits, yeah, I've been following you because you're a steady paycheck. I like how there's plenty of room for a sequel. Since the Vayne are dead, the Harbinger is closer to returning to the world, which is what the Church wants. Or maybe that's what they want. Maybe they want him back for a particular reason. Maybe they want to destroy the Maelstrom altogether. Who knows? It's still a mystery, and we don't know what the head of the Church is up to. The rare monsters, the 2 for every zone, were very fun encounters and interesting to find. I like them better than the Final Fantasy XII hunts, or the percentage chance to spawn rare mobs from other RPGs. Having distinct ways to find them and having hints from an NPC in the zone don't make them too obscure or hard to find. Unlike, say, Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Spear. I'm still salty about that one. The optional super boss, the God King, has a very good preamble to him and was a very good fight. I'm glad that he got a little bit of fanfare and a little bit of dialogue to flesh him out, which isn't something that you see most of the time with secret bosses in video games. The evil soul flower man I will remember just like I remembered the Chimera's dad in Fullmetal Alchemist, and this entire story is just as sad. I was also a bit bummed out in the second half of the game. The NPC dialogue didn't change to reflect, say, the rebellion at Tormund, or the end of days literally all around them as the sky's color changed. It's not a big thing, but it's something I missed. I think that's partly because that's when the endgame opens up. But there's time pressure of the sky is literally going to kill us, so it needs to be both casual and go at the same time. I just don't think it lands, and it could have used that little extra bit of polish. Chained Echoes is a masterpiece, and it's well worth anyone's time to play. It's not perfect, there's even a spot on the world map that looks like it got missed, but for what it is, I'm glad I spent the 50 hours seeing everything this game had to offer. While it invokes feelings of the past while recreating and improving old mechanics in old RPGs, the story is deep and reverberates. Matthias Linda, thank you for your hard work and sacrifice for an excellent game.
Psst. Hey, Hodazeta from the future here. Did you know that Chained Echoes has a DLC? And it's out now? You should check it out.